On a quiet October night in 1967, in a village known for lobster traps and ghost stories, a glowing object fell from the sky and vanished beneath the waves. But when no wreckage, no bodies, and no explanation surfaced, the people of Shag Harbour were left with only one conclusion. Something unexplained had come from beyond. Good evening and welcome back to Paragoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. I'm your host, K.D. Culpa, a horror author and paranormal researcher based in Regina, Saskatchewan. Each week on the podcast, we dive into the shadows of Saskatchewan's past and even go beyond, uncovering dark history, mysteries, urban legends, and sometimes we even get to some monsters. If you're one of the listeners that comes back each week but aren't yet subscribed, please hit that follow button and share it with someone who loves the weird and wonderful. I've got more big guests and haunted deep dives coming your way, so join me now as we explore the unknown and bring life to the ghosts and monsters hiding in the dark. All right, tonight we are returning to another Canadian Legends and Monsters feature episode. In this series, if you haven't heard it before, we dive into the mythical creatures and urban legends of Canada to see if we can connect them to true history. Tonight, we are heading to Shag Harbour. So now, in case you don't know, Shag Harbour is a small fishing village in Nova Scotia. It is within the municipality of the District of Barrington in Shelburne County. According to one source, it was named after a bird called the shag, which is from the cormorant family. Its population is roughly 400 to 450 residents, although this is according to Wikipedia, so I can't say for sure that's the actual number today. I couldn't find that information. I wasn't able to pinpoint an exact date of when the town was initially started, but the Chapel Hill Museum, which is in Shag Harbour, is said to date back to 1856, and it was speculated that this church was actually built on the same location that was called the Old House by someone named Samuel de Champlain in a 1612 map of Acadia. So people have apparently lived in the area for, over 400 years, so that's quite a long time. And the town was so small even years ago that the harbor was typically left off most maps prior to a major event that brought them a lot of publicity. So what was that event, you may ask? Well, it was one of the best documented UFO events in Canada, maybe even beyond. Or at least one of the best documented that we know of. And there's even some mystery about what we do know. So let's get into the actual story. Okay, so on October 4th, 1967, at 11:20 p.m., they say at least 11 people claimed to see a low flying object with flashing lights heading towards the harbor. Some of these witnesses claimed it was exactly 4 orange lights flashing. The object was then suddenly dove at a 45-degree angle towards the water. So this is like the ocean, in case you're wondering. This is also reported that they heard a whistling sound like a bomb, then a whoosh, and lastly a loud bang as the object hit the water. Apparently there was a group of teenagers that were near the water's edge when this all happened, and so they moved closer and reported seeing that the object was floating on the water about 250 to 300 meters offshore until eventually it started to sink. Now, I was able to actually find a clip of a UFO report. This was actually a CBC video that had included it. So when they revisited the story back in 2017, so I just kind of paused the video to read you some of the clip here. But they supposedly found this through the Library and Archives Canada, which I unfortunately cannot go and visit myself because I think it's in Ontario. And yeah, that'd be a long plane ride to read a document. Anyway, here's what the opening said from what I could see on this video. An RCMP corporal and six other witnesses observed what they believed to be an unidentified flying object off the southwest coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, on the 4th of October, 1967. The object was described as approximately 60 feet in length and was flying in an easterly direction when first sighted. During their observation, the UFO descended rapidly to the surface and made a bright splash as it struck the water. For some time after this impact, a single white light remained on the surface. The RCMP corporal endeavored to reach the floating white object, but unfortunately, before he could reach the location, the object sank. A search of the area failed to produce any material evidence which would assist in explaining or establishing the identity of the object. So apparently, when local fishing boats and a Canadian Coast Guard rushed to the site, they weren't able to actually find any debris. They weren't able to find any survivors. What they did say they found, around the area where they had seen this object, was just a long patch of thick yellow foam left on the water's surface where the object had been seen. So then on October 7th, in 1967, the Halifax newspaper, which at that time was called the Chronicle Herald, had this to say about the event. The headline reads, "Could be something concrete in Shag Harbour UFO RCAF." The article continues, "A spokesman for a special and little-known Royal Canadian Air Force Department in Ottawa for the investigation of unidentified flying objects said last night a series of bright lights which glided into the ocean off Shag Harbour, Shelburne County, Wednesday night may be one of the extremely rare cases where something concrete may be found." The spokesperson, who identified himself as Squadron Leader Bain, said his department was very interested in the matter. The article continues to say that they were continuing the search for any evidence of the object along the coast. They were even using a 7-man diving team, I believe mostly from the Navy, but I can't recall if it's all from the Navy diving team. But if nothing was found by them, they said they were going to try spatial metal detection equipment. And according to this article, at least a dozen people saw the object and lights hit the water, not just 11, in case, that one more means something big. Now, what many of these old articles don't mention is that there was apparently sightings even before this event happened. So earlier that evening, a man by the name of Captain Leo Howard Mersey apparently saw 4 objects hovering in a rectangular formation 28 kilometers from his ship. Apparently, he first saw them just as blips on his radar that weren't moving, so it made him, decide to go and look out a window to see what was happening in the sky. Or maybe he looked in the water first and then looked up. I don't know. It doesn't go into that much detail. But they had radioed into the harbor master in Halifax asking for an explanation before returning to land. And apparently he had 20 crew members on the boat with him, and all of them had agreed that they saw these flying objects. Even an Air Canada flight apparently had seen something prior to the object hitting the water. Air Canada Flight 305 was flying over Sherbrooke at 12,000 feet on their way to Toronto from Halifax when the first officer, going by the name Robert Ralph, told the captain, who was Pierre Charbonneau, that there was something in the sky on the left side of the aircraft. Can you imagine that, being 12,000 feet above, in the sky and seeing something outside? Interesting. This is back in the 1960s, right? So interesting. Apparently this is around 7:15 that night. So, 4 hours earlier. In the report, they said the object was flying on a parallel course with the airplane and only a few miles away from them. The report went on to say that the object was rectangular and had a string of small lights trailing it. Then at 7:19 p.m., so 4 minutes later, they claimed to have seen an explosion happen near the object, but that there was no sound. So it was a quiet explosion, didn't hear anything. They just saw the, I guess, lights of an explosion. And then suddenly a second explosion occurred, but this one encompassed the object in a blue cloud. So in the days following, it was confirmed from local officials that no aircraft were missing, and no one had any answers for what had been flying in the sky that day. They searched the water for 3 days, but found nothing, not even a trace of an object having crashed in the water at all. So it just, the yellow foam was all that they found. So you'd think that would be the end of the story, but thankfully it isn't. Apparently, it did kind of quiet down initially after that 1967 night. There's the big hoopla for the first week, and then because nothing was ever found, it kind of just went down and went quiet for a while. But thankfully, in 1993, the Mutual UFO Network investigator, Chris Stiles, apparently decided to dig into the case himself to see if he could uncover any more answers behind the unusual event that had fallen on Shag Harbour almost 30 years before. So he managed to interview many of the original witnesses. I guess he checked newspapers and, figured out the names of who was originally there. And he even actually gathered some interviews from military witnesses. Now, the military witnesses, of course, didn't want their names to be printed, so they had to be considered off the record interviews. So these unofficial discussions and records apparently gave more answers than were originally told back in 1967. So these new interviews claim the object did not disappear completely, leaving only a yellow foam on the surface of the ocean. Instead, the claim goes that the object actually was able to travel underwater for roughly 25 miles. And the location it ended up nearby was then known as Government Point, which is where the first sound surveillance system of Canada had been built in 1955. So, for those of you who don't know what this is, which I didn't before reading it, so I had to go digging into it a little bit, the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, was a station that was vital in the anti-submarine warfare. So that was going on during the Cold War. So essentially, the station was built to pay attention to underwater sound waves, to try and determine or track if submarines were coming close to the coast. So it's interesting that the UFO would travel to it after hitting the water. I don't know, could this have been on purpose or just, it seems too coincidental, right? So anyway, since the station was highly confidential on its purpose at the time, of course they couldn't go around and tell the locals about the fact that the object was detected on their sonar systems. Apparently, they even positioned 3 naval vessels over top of the object to monitor it under the water. Now, after a couple of days, apparently the military decided, you know what, instead of sitting here and waiting, maybe they would approach the UFO and, go on a salvage mission. Like, obviously, we'd be curious about what it was, right? And what's inside of it, and who's inside of it, and where did it come from? However, before they were actually able to start the mission, they were still in the process of planning and deciding how they were going to go about it, I guess. A second object showed up underwater and approached the first. Yes, now we have 2 unidentified, I guess not flying objects now. Now they're swimming objects. I don't know. Hanging out in the ocean off the coast of Shag Harbour in Nova Scotia. Something that nobody was mentioning to the residents that saw the original crash landing. And apparently both UFOs remained there for a week. Or at least that's what these unofficial interviews claim. And I'm surprised that nobody tried to approach the vessels in a week. But I guess maybe they weren't putting off any indication of needing help either. Although there was speculation that the second UFO must have been somehow alerted by the first about the crash and had come to help repair the ship or, check on the being inside or whatever. Anyway, the Navy apparently continued to monitor for that entire week that the two UFOs were underwater, which honestly makes me wonder what they truly saw. Like, surely there would have been some sort of indication of a being going from one UFO to enter the first UFO, or some sort of, indication of communication, or just something, unless they were able to, what's the term from Star Trek? Beam me up. So yeah, unless they were able to magically transport or beam to each other's ships. I'm curious how they were communicating and if the Navy actually was picking up on more than they were willing to share. But, anyways, the claim goes that after a week of being underwater together, doing whatever it was they were doing, the two ships suddenly sped off, remaining underwater until they hit the Gulf of Maine, when they returned to the sky and disappeared. So, even with these unofficial statements, however, this is all still considered to just be theories. The official statement from the government remains to this day that the object disappeared without a trace and that they have no idea what happened to the object that fell out of the sky. Now, if you don't believe these claims from the unofficial statements, there are many other theories and speculations that you can check out about what really happened that night in Shag Harbour. And so I'll share, a few of them with you. I'm sure there's more because, that's just the way these things work. But okay. One of the theories is that the UFO was actually a Russian spacecraft that crashed in the water that night. So, given the times, Cold War, this could be a good explanation for why no one locally had an answer for where the object came from. Like I said, they checked with all of the local airports and the military, and no one was missing a plane. So this makes this a popular theory, as there was, I guess, rumor going around at that time, or so they say, that about a Russian submarine was somewhere in the area. So I guess they're thinking that this aircraft was Russian and had crashed, and the submarine had tried to go help it, maybe? I don't know. Or maybe the aircraft was aiming for the submarine. I'm not sure. But given the time of the crash, it could be plausible that there was some unknown Russian activity going on, maybe. But that also feels a little too easy to blame it on them. That sounds like a movie. Let's blame it on the Russians. That sounds like a movie thing. Anyway, another theory is that there were confidential military testing going on. So the whole idea of experimental flying or experimental vessels. Again, another theory that really feels a little too easy, but again, entirely plausible, I suppose. Of course, you wouldn't have a UFO story without a government cover-up conspiracy, which is, the fun one, I think. Given that there are supposed unofficial statements from some military personnel, does make you kind of wonder if there's a lot more that the government never told anyone about what really happened that night, or in the week and a half after, for that matter. And given those that gave the unofficial statements never came out with their names or wanted to be part of the publicity around the second investigation, it does kind of make you wonder how much more the government could be hiding from the general public. Because, for some reason, UFOs are well hidden topics. So you just don't know. Now, something that I love about the story is that Shag Harbour community have seemed to embrace the UFO event as their history. They believe it was UFO and they embrace it fully, or at least they seem to. There's a Shag Harbour UFO Center that is dedicated to that night, so it's kind of like a museum. And it has many of the artifacts, documents, and eyewitness accounts from that night. Apparently, they also have a UFO gazebo and picnic site nearby where you can sit and look at the ocean where the event happened. So where the actual object crashed and the yellow foam had been left. And where the object went, you can speculate, I guess. So once a year, they also have a Shag Harbour UFO Expo, and that's in Nova Scotia. So I went and checked out their website on this year's expo, and they say it's to bring together UFO experts and eyewitnesses to share their observations and latest theories and research about unidentified flying objects. The event is organized by the Shag Harbour UFO Incident Society, which became a registered nonprofit organization apparently back in 2006. And they are actually also the ones that are in charge of the UFO Center. So they kind of are doing both. And I think I read something about they also have an exhibit on space, but I'm not sure what all of that is about. But yeah, it sounds like a cool little town to go visit anyway. Honestly, I love this story. I think I just love the idea of UFOs. Although, honestly, I have a very healthy, respectful distance from all things UFO related. And I think you would agree with me if you watched that movie, The Fourth Kind, with Mila Jovovich. That one, I don't know. Still to this day, I do not like white owls. Like just those specific white owls. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. You know, snowy white owls here in Saskatchewan, they don't bother me. I'm talking these other white owls with the really, I don't even know if it was a real white owl. Maybe it wasn't even a real. I don't know. I can't remember. Like I said, it was years ago that I watched it, yet it has still had an impact on me this many years later because I will not go to Alaska. I'm sorry, Alaska, but I'm not coming, especially to that little remote village that you have to fly into. I'm not coming to see you. Sorry. Anyway. I still find UFO stories fascinating, of course. I think it just is kind of like adjacent to ghost stories enough. I mean, I don't know. I think it'd be incredibly lonely to think that we are alone in the universe. You know, given we are just one small planet within one small galaxy, there's no way we are the only life. So surely there will be times when we see things that we can't explain, like they did in October 1967. But I don't know. What do you think? I find the theories about Russian or secret government experimental vessels just disappointing and like they're coming from a movie. I'd much rather find out that the aliens were here, that they crash landed, fixed their ship, and then left without causing any damage, any destruction, didn't even converse with us. They just left. I don't know. Isn't that a more hopeful way to think about it? That yes, they're aliens, but they don't want to hurt us at all. They're just kind of, they checked us out, they left. I don't know. Do you think that an alien crashed in the ocean near Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia back in 1967? Then had to hang out and wait for a friend to come and help repair the ship before they were able to fly away and return to whatever planet or solar system they came from? Or are you more leaning towards the government cover-up with some sort of ties to the Cold War that was going on during that time? I mean, that would be, I guess, a convenient answer, even if it's not the fun one that I would prefer. I'm a believer that there is a lot of other life out there in the universe. I mean, realistically, just look at the diversity of life on our planet alone. So there has to be, right? There has to be more out there. And I also think that they're already living on our planet. I truly do. I think if there are aliens out there, they're probably already here. They've probably been here and left, or they're still here and, checking us out, and we just don't know it. I don't know. Camouflage somehow. Maybe they look like us, or, can do what are the shows? Is it Star Trek 2 where they can like do the, what is it, masking or whatever? Anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I think even my grandfather had a UFO story up in Nipawin, Saskatchewan, back when he was younger, so long before my time. But I don't remember exactly what happened. I just remember it happened middle of a field, and he saw something land that he couldn't explain. I think he was on a bike or something. I don't think he was in a vehicle. I can't remember now. But I think actually both of my grandfathers had a UFO story up around Nipawin. And it kind of makes you wonder too, because why did they all happen back then? Why aren't they happening now? Unless it's because we all have cameras now that we carry in our pockets, and so suddenly they've realized this and don't want to show off. I don't know. It just interesting. I even lived for a while up in St. Paul, Alberta, where they had a UFO landing pad as their tourist attraction. And I remember, I can't remember the story behind the landing pad, but I know it was something about, UFOs. And I thought it was awesome while I lived there. But then while I was living there, I was a crop scout. And so, that means I had to go out into crops for farmers and checked to see if they're, what kind of weeds they had, so they knew what kind of, how they can try to alleviate the problems, or what stage was their crop in, so they knew how it was going, or if it needed more water, or if it needed more nutrients, all of those things. And there were a couple times in certain fields that were just weird. Like where it was, I remember one section was just a big circle of ash under the ground and nothing would grow there. And, we couldn't figure out why. And the farmer had said, yeah, it hasn't been growing there for years. And it was just this big circle. And when I dug into it, because I was curious, right? Obviously, since I chase after ghosts and things, but I dug into it and it was like ash under the surface. But why wouldn't anything grow? It's just bizarre, bizarre. Anyway, but you can let me know what you think. You can send me a message or comment on one of the posts about this episode on any of my platforms. You can find me at most places under KDKULPA. Or if you have your own UFO story, then make sure to let me know. I always love hearing any stories of the unexplained, whether they're ghosts, UFOs, something else entirely, I don't know, invisible people, maybe. Sometimes I wonder about that too. But it doesn't have to only be ghosts. I love to hear them all. Thank you for listening to Paraghoul Paranormal. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, then make sure you check out my local YQR Ghost Guide to learn more about the top ghosts and haunted buildings in Regina. Within the free download, you'll learn about who the most famous ghosts of Regina, Saskatchewan are, as well as some of the history behind the most haunted buildings. So head over to my website at kdkulpa.com to get your copy today. And before you go, I just want to say thank you for being here. Every listen, every share, every bit of support helps me take this podcast further. It allows me to interview bigger names in the horror and paranormal world, travel to more haunted places, and create more behind-the-scenes content just for you. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. I'll keep doing my part to make this show something special and spooky just for you. So stay tuned for more episodes where we uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and dive deeper into the shadows. This is Katie Culpa signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.